everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and I just want you folks to know that BCTV, we did get good news this week that we will be back in the studio and back at the station, hopefully in July. We're not going to count our chickens before they're hatched, but that's the news that we're getting, and we're hoping that that will happen. So it will be wonderful to be back in the studio. Zoom has been great, and I am so grateful for it, but there's nothing like being face-to-face with people. So we look forward to having you with us for those shows coming up. Today on our show, I'm very happy to have Keith Marx. Keith is the new executive director at Next Stage Arts Project in Putney. It's a hard one to say, but it's a great place. He comes with experience as a cultural entrepreneur, and he's worked in a variety of nonprofit arts organizations as both a founder and a producer. Keith has also traveled widely, and he brings the essence of other cultures to everything that he does. He and his family moved here from Jacksonville, Florida in the middle of February. Thank you, Keith, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. So you're in Putney, Vermont. You came in the middle of February. We will tell that whole story a little bit later in the show. But I just wanted to go back a little bit, way back for you to, you grew up outside of New York City, or a little north of New York City. What was Newburgh?
It was Newburgh. I was born there, and then we lived out in Long Island when I was till about age 10, and then we moved to Florida when I was about 10.
Mm-hmm. And when you were a kid, what kinds of things really got your interest? What were you involved with?
I really wanted to be an actor when I was little. I always kind of imagined that was something that I wanted to pursue, and I did do a little bit of that through Improv Theater. But I think as I got older, especially into high school, I got more into the arts and cultural scene, and a lot of my attention was taken to music and literature.
Mm-hmm. And when you were in college, you studied some philosophy, and you got into communications and marketing?
Yeah, I started writing for an entertainment weekly. I guess up here the Commons would be the thing closest to it. I started doing music reviews. I had met the arts and entertainment editor at some sort of social gathering, and I had expressed an interest in writing, and he invited me in, and I worked as an intern twice, and then decided to get a bachelor's degree in journalism and a minor in philosophy.
Mm-hmm. And a minor in philosophy. And then, so you also went from college, actually before college, you were doing a little bit of production work, weren't you, in Florida?
Yeah, I got into booking shows in college. I had a production company, and then started doing college radio, and then got onto the production board and started doing large-scale productions in college. And I was writing for the college newspaper, and I was really involved in the music scene, starting to become, I was a big advocate and a voice for a lot of the more local regional artists. And so it was a great time to be in Jacksonville at the time, because the art scene was actually quite small comparatively to what it is now. And so there were no separation of sort of genres, or no separation in terms of mediums. The arts community really kind of really congregated around a few venues. And that was an eye-opening time for me, getting involved in arts and music. I was doing improv theater.
Improv theater.
Yeah, improvisational theater. I was part of a troupe in Jacksonville called Improv Jacksonville, and that was fun. And I extended a little bit. A few years later, I went to New York City, and I lived there for a few months, and I studied with Upright Citizens Brigade Theater.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't. Going into the route of music is definitely the more of the stronger aspect of my arts involvement.
Yeah, improv, though, I would think it would really serve you well in terms of being in the public and being able to talk to people at the drop of a hat about any subject.
Yeah, it also, the whole principle behind it is, that the core of improv is the principle of yes and. So you accept a situation as it is, and then you build on it. You don't negate or try to work around a suggestion. And I think that's really good philosophy in life to have. Especially, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, but living in Asia and getting into Buddhism and improv theater and Buddhist teachings are fairly similar in terms of looking at situations as they are and not wishing them to be different, but making positive choices that create positive outcomes. So that works on the stage as well as in life, and I think that has really served me.
That's very interesting. Yes, because you have to go with what is right in front of you, right? Whatever it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Be thankful for what it is, that the gift that someone's giving you, and how do you make the best of what that is.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about the traveling because you traveled a lot, and you traveled to Europe, Asia, Ireland, Tibet, India, and Israel. And I think that's not a complete list, but that was a lot of traveling. And you had some adventures, and you had some experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of experiences. So yeah, I spent about let me try to think. I had about a year's time in Europe living over there, and I worked in a pub in London, and then I worked at the Edinburgh Film House where they do the Edinburgh Film Festival.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Cologne, Germany, to Köln, and lived with a friend of mine there, a German friend, who was doing his civil service or his social service, which was in a halfway home, what we would call a halfway home for men getting out of prison, transitioning back into life. And I got to live in this home for a few months. And then I spent, 4 years in Asia, and I was teaching English in South Korea, but I backpacked and I went to India, Laos, Japan, Thailand. I was in Tibet, Philippines, Hong Kong, Taiwan. I'm sure there's some other places. Came back to the US, got to live with my sister for a little bit, and then really didn't feel like I was ready to settle down in the US. And I went over to the Middle East, and I got a master's degree in Israel in teaching English as a second language, and got the opportunity to travel around the Middle East a bit. I went to Egypt, and so had 2.5 years in there. And then after my wife and I were here in the States, we had an opportunity to go live in Central America and Costa Rica for a bit too.
Wow. That's a lot of traveling. That's a lot of
many lives.
Many, and you met your wife in Israel, I believe, right? Yes.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, we were dancing at, music. Music is the thing that really kind of is the thread. So we met at a concert dancing.
Well, you had a great line. What's the great line? That music is a passport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Music is a passport. That is so true.
So great.
That idea that it allows you access to other cultures and ways of thinking. Like even thinking kind of like what's very like relevant right now is all of the civil unrest and civil rights and social justice. And, my white suburban upbringing did not give me a window into that struggle. It was through music.
Right.
Through listening to Black artists in the 60s and 50s who were talking about social justice and civil rights. That music was the thing that gave me the window to peer in, and that allows you access into those cultures. And so through traveling, I studied a lot of the music of the cultures that I was living in as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that must have been really interesting. Plus you pick up, I would think that doing that and with your focus in that way, that you pick up the rhythm of the culture, literally.
Yeah, that's true.
The difference.
There's also the poetry behind, or the language it gives you access to, kind of gives you an understanding of like what those countries have, done culturally. So for instance, Korea is known as like the K-pop is the big thing. Well, there's some serious social underpinnings of why K-pop is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
In the 70s, there was a huge psychedelic rock scene in Korea. And the president basically put a heavy hand over anybody who was outside of the cultural barriers that he wanted. And there's a whole story behind it. But understanding the socio acoustic relationships also give you an idea of the cultural underpinnings of what made that culture be what it is today.
Yes, right. That's a good phrase, the socioacoustic underpin. Yeah, very good. So also, I'm a little curious because you're going into a lot of places where the belief systems and the religions were very different than the way you were brought up and what we know in the States. And could you speak a little bit to that, to how the spiritualities affected you or informed you? I know it's probably a big subject, but
Yeah, and I'm trying to think where to start. So growing up Jewish, I kind of was, it has a very loose connection for me. And I was, raised in a Reform synagogue, and I didn't really have a sense of attachment to it. And so stopped practicing, I stopped believing. I was maybe not quite an atheist, but certainly agnostic. And to get to Asia, where I was introduced to Buddhism and Taoism, and I to say introduced is probably not correct, because I had been reading books, for years prior to, but getting there and being able to practice in monasteries and meet monks and go to teachings really opened me up. And the Western form of, the form of Buddhism that I got into was Zen. And there you're really, in Buddhism in general, you're stripping away your sense of the way that you get to your essence, your spiritual self, is by removing attachments, right? So I'm not my clothes, I'm not my hair, and then you start sort of removing other things, like I'm not my history or my culture, I'm not my religion, I'm not, and it's subtractive, and that informed a lot of my spiritual pursuits for many years. And then I went to Israel, where it's the exact opposite, where your sense of spirituality is dictated by the form, by the clothes, by the culture that you identify with. And so I still wrestle with it. I would say that I am definitely connected to my Jewish identity after living in Israel, but still rooted in a sense of Buddhist and Taoist principles that kind of guide me through. So, and it helps me in different ways. So as things like depression or fear, or even joyous things like being with my kids, I try not to identify. It's not I am sad. I'm not sadness. I'm feeling sadness. In this moment, sadness is here. It's present. And so having that relationship with those spiritual backgrounds, and having also practiced yoga for many years, also kind of helps inform a lot of my spirituality. So, I wouldn't say one replaced the other. It's like they all built my agnostic self connected to my Buddhist self, connected to my Taoist yogic self. And on top of that is a weird Jewish identity that's there as well. That's always at a fight, I would say, with sort of not wanting to have an identity or not connecting. So yeah, I think there's a process. So I came back from living in Israel. Tehila came with me. We were married at that point. My dad had cancer. He passed away that year of pancreatic cancer. And I felt really charged energetically from living in Israel. There's cultural underpinnings to Israel that sort of just informed a certain directness and a certain, like, we can fix the problems now. Like, why wait? And then there was also, it was guided by the heart of sort of that Buddhist background of like, we're all struggling. And so how do we improve this situation that we're in? So I actually started a nonprofit called PB&J, and it's called Party, Benefit, and Jam. And that was one of the first things that I did. And during that time, Tehila and I partnered with another couple, and we opened up a healing center. So we were teaching yoga, doing Pilates, massage, acupuncture. We were doing community events, dinners, workshops, and then I started something with a woman in town who ran an organization of vegetarian and vegan, that was vegetarian and vegan focused, and we started this thing called No Meat March. And the idea of getting people to become more conscious around what they ate. So health, wellness, diet was definitely the focus. Community organizing around these sort of topics and bringing people together. And through that, you need to have programming, right? That brings people together. So then there is my music production background coming into that. And I progressed for years and eventually took a position as the community community outreach and marketing director of a public park in Jacksonville. And then that's how Avant came about. It was sort of this evolutionary process of using the arts to impact Jacksonville. And that's when we created Avant. And, you know, I'm missing a ton of different projects and things in
Yes,
between.
you're right.
But and then Avant for the past 5 years has grown into a really kind of well-received organization in Jacksonville.
And the other thing too, again, and this seems to be a bit of a thread, you're bringing together a lot of different things into one place and making that available to the community and to the culture that is existing there.
And I think that there's a certain level of personal responsibility for my community, my planet, you know, the world I'm living in and the world I'm raising my children in now. So, you know, I think that that's where it really comes from. So I'll say this about the arts. It's, you know, there's, you know, only a few things that bring together people en masse, right? Sadly, we're seeing protests and in some cases riots, right? But then there's sports, which can be very divisive, right? Then there's politics, which can also be divisive. And it's not to say that arts can't be divisive in places, but the divisiveness is usually in ways that we're thinking, right? And bringing people together to experience new ways of thought. And so for me, the arts, to go back to that music as a passport, you can say that arts are a passport. We're bringing people together to share space, to have an experience that is nurturing or challenging, but there's some type of development, whether that's community or personal. There's a sense of development, and I think having shared experiences are really, really valuable. And especially like right now, we're craving it. One of the books that really brought me into playing an instrument was a book called "This Is Your Brain on Music." And in it, he talks about that when we sing together, there's a chemical that gets released in the brain for connectivity.
Yeah.
So when you think of, you know, 50,000 people singing a song together, or if you're in your church or in your synagogue, you know, and you're singing together, that creates physical chemicals that allow you to feel a sense of nurtured and connectivity. And now that we're all stuck in our homes staring at screens, like I wonder, how are we, everybody must be feeling, and I think I am, a sense of loss of connectivity. And so arts are a way to do that.
I'd love to know your first impressions of coming to Putney. Especially, you landed in February, right? And the pandemic hit about 6 weeks later. There's that. But anyway,
so we actually came up here for the interview. We arrived on Halloween, and then there was some winds, and it knocked out the electricity, and there was a fire in somewhere in Brattleboro. And the board was really they acted quickly to get us out of. Actually, we were in Coors B&B staying, and they had to move us over to another apartment because we had no electricity and no heat.
Wow.
But I'll say, like, the first impressions of Putney, by the time I left here, I had told Billy Strauss, who was the interim executive director and co-founder of Next Stage, I said, I really enjoy being up here. I said, even if I don't get this job, will you help me find another job up here? So we knew we wanted to be up here from the interview.
Really? Wow. Even under all those conditions, that's impressive.
It was great. I mean, there is a certain like magic that's up here that I think a lot of people who live here can feel and talk about.
Yeah.
My first impressions, first of all, with the pandemic, I would say that my wife and I feel really thankful to have our kids here during this time, because it is such a nurturing place. Vermont's political leadership and its community support is vastly different from Florida, and we feel much more held here than we did in Jacksonville. And so,
that's amazing.
Yeah, being here is great, and I really am thankful to be in this incredible role. This role in this incredible organization. With, you know, Next Stage, the thing that really won me over on the interview was the theater. As soon as I walked into the theater, I was like, okay, this is not some it's not held together with Scotch tape and glue.
That's right.
This is a serious undertaking that this community has taken on.
Yeah.
And I love the gallery. I love the commercial kitchen. I love the community space, the sense of storytelling every month.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different opportunities for growth and community involvement here. It's a really special place and organization, and so we're happy to be here.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I love that you couldn't have come at a more challenging time, unless it had been a big snowstorm. That would have sort of topped everything off as well. And one of the things I think that I'd love to hear you talk about the pandemic, and if you can go back a little bit and think about what it was like for you, how you responded, because I think it took all of us a while to figure out how we were going to do this and what we were going to do. So how was that for you?
Challenging. I thankfully I had a good friend visiting us right before everything shut down. A couple and their son were visiting us from Florida, actually, and he has family in this area, like New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So he's a brilliant guy, and he said to me, he's like, okay, so how are you pivoting? I was like, what do you mean pivoting? We're closing the doors. He's like, no, this is an opportunity. Like this, like you're given like a blank slate to create and through this. And so that next day we started on what eventually was the quarantine sessions, and kudos to Justin Altman for giving me the idea for Cooped Up Kids. I thought about rolling it all together, and he gave me that name, and he was like, that would be a great thing. So we created the quarantine sessions and Cooped Up Kids. I had Barry and Jaja, who work here at Next Stage. I said, let's call every artist that may want to submit something, a short video. We had the custom animation built for the series. We started working with a student filmmaker who lives in the area, whose school was shut down. And I reached out to my global network of artists that I've worked with in the past. And we've been putting out the quarantine sessions and Cooped Up Kids from, I think within a week of closing, we had the first videos up and out.
Wow, I knew it was quick. I didn't know it was that quick. That's pretty remarkable. And these are great things that you're doing. I mean, they're so interesting. The kids stuff is so much fun. And the quarantine sessions, I have to say, one thing that really struck me, you did one with T. Skoll and Doug Trump. And I know that for Teese, it was something that he'd been thinking about doing for a long time and just hadn't had the time in his life to do it. But it also harkens back to your whole idea of bringing different mediums together, bringing different art forms together and creating something new, and also challenging us a little bit to look beyond what we think is a painting on the wall or what we think is a piece of music. So yeah, they've been wonderful. And I think that people have really, how's the feedback on those?
Really positive. Certain ones get more exposure than others. And I think that comes from the community around that person sharing it out.
Yes, always.
Yeah, we've had some really powerful artists that had, from my connections around the world, I've been able to have stuff go into the quarantine sessions. And so the Next Stage brand and Putney and Windham County has gotten out a little bit more because of these, which has been incredible. So I think it's been good for our community in terms of content coming in, but also letting the world know about what's going on over here in our little corner of the United States.
One thing I did want to mention is that in Jacksonville last year, you won the Arts Innovator Award, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville does yearly arts awards.
Uh-huh.
And so it was really nice to be recognized by peers.
Yeah, it's always nice to be recognized, right?
Yeah.
Next Stage is now entering its 10th. It's finishing its 10th year. It's entering its next decade. You came in at such an amazing time, right? The pandemic, the 10th year. You're working on, I think, a new strategic plan. And I don't know if that's 5-year kind of plan or what. Can you divulge anything there? Any little pieces for the public?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in its early phases. One of the things that I that's important to me is I'm not here to lay down my artistic vision onto this community. It should be a collaborative process. I want to bring what I've experienced, and I want to listen to what the community needs and wants. And so, to be honest, the pandemic and shutting the doors has sort of accelerated the rate that I thought we would be moving at. But now that there's no more script to work from, we're having to create it. In some ways, it's very liberating that I can collaborate and listen without sort of the what has been, because now everybody's having to like reinvent themselves. So the 5-year plan, I hope, will tackle a refined mission, a refined vision. I'm hoping that we hear feedback from the community about what needs to happen, where are we weak, where can we get stronger.
Mhm.
And my goal is to have, I want to have more community engagement. I would like to be develop and grow the organization's presence and relevance to the community.
Mhm.
I'd like to expand our programmatic vision. For me, world music, world arts, world dance is important. Bringing in other voices, multicultural.
Yeah.
Bringing in, I'm building a relationship with my buddy Eugene over at the Vermont Jazz Center, and jazz has been a big thing with me, and so I would like to work with him on collaborations.
Mhm.
Doing more collaboratively is something really big. In fact, I just got off of a call from some Wyndham Arts presenting organizations about potentially working on a project with them that could materialize in the next few weeks. And then the other thing I'd like to do is sort of like explore the idea of how this area can become part of the connection of the New England arts and cultural scene and northeastern arts and cultural scene, building partnerships with, say, organizations in New York and Boston, and becoming satellite experiences for some of those organizations, to kind of fold, to focus in on the community and serve the community, but also expand the impact that Next Stage and this area could have. So
Yes, that's a great vision. It's a great vision to hold. It's a vision that I think just about everybody will share with you, and I think that it's time. So it's going to be really interesting. I'm so glad that you're with us, Keith. Nice to have you at Next Stage, and to have all of the ideas that you've got percolating there. I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot. So everybody should stay tuned. Thanks for
very much for having me and helping us, present Next Stage. So it means a lot.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate you being on the show and to hearing all of your stories. So we will see you around town.
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us today and for listening to these stories and being with us. And again, stay tuned. We are continuing to be a weekly show through the pandemic. And again, we're very glad to have Zoom with us and to be able to have all these folks on, and for everyone like Keith to be so accommodating and to accept all of the rough edges that we all have in broadcasting and connecting with each other. So we will see you next week. Thank you so much.